It's coming. Okay. All right, well, first of all, I want to thank the Elephants, who I feel have been part of our partners in working very hard for church reform for a very long time. Certainly, it's always a great honor to be in solidarity with the grassroots Catholics who care about the future of the church. And so we work together on many projects for a very long time. So it's a great honor to be here with you, and I hope my remarks today will be life-giving. I was asked to do a personal reflection on the state of the church today and to look into the future. Now you have to know part of my background is in science. So I wasn't going to just sort of think, oh yeah, here. I had to ground my thinking in what's going on right now. So I have a number of different, like I said, you know. So but maybe before I do that, I should just give a little bit. State of the church today, there's sort of quite a few topics here. I hope I'm not going to race through too fast, but looking at the state of the church today, looking at the reality of pre-shortage parish closings, and what happens when parishioners push back, which I'll cover stuff from my book. I want to talk about the legacy of Pope Francis, which is amazing, some general observations, a bit about the Synod of Synodality, Pope Leo XIV, and then you'll get Chris's crystal ball based on. So I learned during the pandemic that people, if they're looking at you, in a little window on their computer, talking heads get really, really boring. So I started doing all my stuff with PowerPoint, and that's what I did today, because I think it's always good to have two kinds of ways of hearing and seeing. So, I have to apologize ahead. It is a lot of data, but I'm thinking that most of you know already, probably at least half of it. So we'll just start. Statistical lens worldwide. More Catholics. In 2023, an 18% increase from 2010. More parishes. Parishes increased by 2.13% from 221,000, and this is worldwide, to 225,000. Fewer priests worldwide, a decrease of 5,240 priests. And of course, the statistics never talk about the people who I think are really the ground troops of the church, and these are pastoral ministers and catechists. When you look, we've got 2,850,000 catechists. Fertile ground for leadership in the future. Worldwide, even though we've had all these increases in Catholics, sacramentally, it's going the other direction. And these statistics, by the way, are from the Center for the Applied Research in the Apostolate, and actually, they're from the Vatican statistics. So baptisms in 1970 were 14.75 million, 2023 just 10.7. Marriages, 360,466 worldwide, 190,024. I'm not sure that's what that's saying, but I think it's an important point to Worldwide, for those of us who wonder, why don't they get it about the pre-shortage here? This was enlightening to me, and these are the most recent statistics showing the percentage increase of Catholics, what percentage of Catholics there are in each of the continents, and what percentage of priests, okay? So here in Africa, 20% of the world's Catholics only has 13.2% of the world's priests. The Americas, which is South America, Central America, North America, 47.8% of the world's Catholics, 29.2% of the world's priests. And I'm going to break this out further. Asia, they didn't tell us how many, 11% of the world's Catholics, they didn't list the priests. In Europe, 20% of the world's Catholics, 38% of the world's priests. And I just want to highlight North America here, which is US and Canada. 6.6% of the Catholics, 10.3% of the priests. So from this global perspective from Rome, Europe and North America have more priests compared to other parts of the world, which makes you wonder why we're importing people from Africa. But anyway, I won't ask that. Okay, the United States, here's more Catholics again, increased by 7.4 million in 2024, fewer priests, again decreased since 2000 by 26%. Fewer parishes, bishops closed almost 3,000 parishes since in the last 24 years, and lay ministers 50,000, and that's from the National Association of Lay Ministry. And this just sort of breaks it out further, and for those like the ordinations are also down from 1970 from 805 to 432, and again pastoral ministers. Okay, parishes in the U.S. declined from over 18,000 in 1970 to 16,000 in 2024. Over nearly 3,500 do not have a resident priest, and some are administered by some other person. Again, in the U.S., sacramentally, the baptisms are down, the marriages are down. Interestingly, though, if you want to look at mass attendance, praying, who say they are strongly affiliated with the church, it's again a different story. In 1970, 54% of Catholics said they attended every week. Now, as of January 2025, Kara says it's at 24%. It's coming back to pre-pandemic levels. Catholics who pray once a week, 76.6%. Lots different from Mass. Catholics who say their religious affiliation is strong, and it's at 42%. It's survey-based information. So here we have Catholics who aren't going to Mass, but still have a pretty powerful, strong faith life. So we have this sort of, I think of it as a somewhat chaotic reality in the United States of Catholic people not going to church, but apparently finding meaning and spiritual nourishment someplace else, but while retaining their Catholic identity. And I love this quote from Emily Dickinson. Some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying home with a bobolink for a chorister and an orchard for a dome. So Emily is not alone today. So given what we've just seen with the statistics, I want to talk a little bit about systemic responses to U.S. parish closings owing to the priest shortage and clergy and sex abuse. And this is from my book, Bending Toward Justice. And just to review, in August 2023, a total of 32 U.S. dioceses and 3 religious orders had filed for bankruptcy protection as a direct result of clergy sex abuse lawsuits. The marked increase in bankruptcy filings was due to the lifting of the statute of limitations in many states. And since the issue first came to light, total settlements have reached $3 billion by late 2023 and are projected to reach $4 billion. And the vast majority of that has been since 2002 when the issue happened in Boston. And again, I'm just going to review Boston because this is sort of the beginning, I think, of a wave of parish closings. In the summer of 2004, the Boston Archdiocese Administrator Richard Lennon announced he would suppress 83 parishes. They promised none of the money from the sale of the parishes would be used for clergy sex abuse. It led to massive resistance. Catholics in 9 parishes occupied their churches 24 hours a day, and some of those occupations continued for 9 years. Much later, the Vatican did admit that pending the closings, they had to do it because there was financial ruin necessitating the sale of Boston churches. Now I'm going to, and this basically shone the light on the reality that the most staunchly faithful of Catholics felt completely powerless in church decision-making, even though it was their own time, talent, and treasure that built their church communities. So, and I'm going to just back up here. This is when Future Church got involved because our board realized very quickly, because we were founded with the recognition that the Eucharist is more central to Catholic worship than the gender or marital status of the priest. And so we were founded in 1990. When this happened in Boston, we knew it was just a matter of time till other dioceses all over the United States will begin to close parishes because it solved two problems for the bishops. One, they didn't have enough priests to staff the parishes they had. Two, they needed money. So that's when we started our Save Our Parish community effort and began to work with Sister Kate Kinsler, a poor handmaid of Jesus Christ, canon lawyer who was educated in Rome at the Angelicum with her doctorate. And her story is covered in the book because, frankly, she was on fire with the rights of the laity. And so we partnered with her, and I'll get into that. But just saying merging parishes and closing and selling churches is not an answer. In 2003, a national study showed that 40% of merged parishes lost parishioners, whereas parishes who were kept open with lay parish directors were more likely to increase parishioners. No one's done any studies since then, and I think institutionally it's because the institutional leadership doesn't really want to know, you know. However, thanks to the 2008 Emerging Models of Parish Leadership, we have identified at least 7 other models using collaborative pastoral teams, parish life coordinators, clustering, merging, mega parishes, which wouldn't be my favorite, but parishioner-led parishes. So, back to what's happening with the closings. Between 2006 and 2011, Sister Kate Kinsler assisted hundreds of parishioners in lodging at least 75 canonical appeals opposing the closure of their vibrant, solvent parishes. Every single recourse was denied by the Vatican. First by the diocesan bishop and later by the Vatican's Congregation for Clergy. And the reason I know is we kept track of it. We were working with Kate, and so we tracked everything we could find. I'm sure there were others, but we didn't know about. However, in early 2011, the tide turned when, thanks to Kate's expertise, Catholics in Camden, Syracuse, Allentown, Springfield, and Buffalo began to win their appeals. And these were soon followed by victories in Cleveland, the Archdiocese of New York, Indianapolis, many others. Just have to show this celebratory thing, because in Cleveland we closed 52 parishes, 13 appealed. Every single parish who appealed won their appeal. Not only we were pretty proud of that. We saw Bishop Lennon coming. He had come to Cleveland from Boston, so we knew we were in for it. And anyway, read it in the book. Anyway, so the deal was, it was for the first time, not only did they win on saving their church, which usually the Vatican would not uphold the merger. The merger had to happen, but you at least got to keep your church. In Cleveland, we won on both the merger and the church, so that was a landmark thing. It led Kate to forge a new path in canon law, and basically she identified the Vatican procedures around parish mergers and closings. No longer would Rome rubber stamp whatever any given bishop wanted. Today, Catholics can exercise appropriate canonical leverage to preserve their parish and church homes. And we can't forget the thousands of parishioners and more than a few good priests who bravely stood in the breach and fought for the scores of parish and church communities that remain open today because of them. Now, just a little bit, we're getting in the weeds a little bit, but in March 2012, Kate went public for the first time. She worked underground for the first 6 years because she didn't want the bishops going after her religious leadership to tell her to quit it. Now, her leadership tells me they would not have done that, but who needs the hassle, you know? So finally, when we got all these wins in Cleveland, she went public, and hers was the first public explanation of Rome's rapidly changing rules around parish mergers and closings. And just what she said in that commentary is that both the Congregation for Clergy and Apostolic Signatura, there's a clear distinction between legitimate reasons to merge parishes and close a church, and that the shortage of priests, diocesan financial challenges, and demographic issues are not sufficient to close churches. That was 2013. In 2020, another set of Vatican instructions said those three criteria also apply to parish mergers, not just to church closures. Yet all three reasons are often cited by bishops even today. And so there has to be distinct canonical processes for closing a church, alienating church property, merging a parish. There has to be a just cause for modifying a parish, a grave cause for closing a church. And see what was happening when they were doing these massive reconfigurations, the bishops were issuing decrees that were basically, we don't have enough priests, we've got financial challenges, therefore, in this parish, and it was the same decree that went to every single parish. And the Vatican is now saying, no. You've got to individualize the situation so it meets the situation of that parish. And I'm happy to say, here's a picture of Kate receiving the Louis J. Trivison Award. Father Trivison was our co-founder for Future Church. Have to get a picture of her in. After a commentary, Kate was swamped with new clients, and they were downloaded just so many more resources. What happens is people download stuff from the Future Church website, and I still staff that for Future Church on behalf. It sort of walks people through how to do the whole recourse process. Anyway, I did a thing. Kate won, out of the 100 appeals in Rome, Kate won 65% of them. And out of the 35 at the diocese, Kate won for half of them. So this is how we track it. We wanted to find out now, because that was, Kate, the past, went home to God in 2019. And so we had planned to write this book together, but because of her illness, she wasn't able to, but I was able to go over and be with her the summer before she died and get in-person interviews about her early life, which is amazing. So anyway, after 2019, and I would say that this project is still ongoing. We have canon lawyers who are helping us. So, if you're interested, you can visit the website. But we wanted to see, did the changes that Kate fought for and all those parishes and priests fight for, are they still going on? Is this still happening? And so I did a survey of the 5 dioceses with reconfiguration processes between 2019 and 2024, and it's Chicago, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Joliet, and Columbus. And as we can see, this is the other thing. I can't, so much information, but at least 3/4 of the time, bishops would not give parishioners the decree closing or merging their parish, so that therefore they could not pursue canon law. This happened in Detroit. Kate had to go to Rome to get Cardinal Livingroom to release the decrees. This was like 6 or 7 years ago. You guys remember. Yeah, okay. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Anyway, these are the things that we have a right to as lay Catholics in the church, and all this stuff was being withheld. But now, in all 4 of the 5, almost all of them they're making the decrees available on the website. They're providing education about canon law. They provide individualized data for each parish. They're educating about rights, 4 of the 5, and explicitly name the parishioner right to seek recourse. So she made a difference. She totally changed how this happens. And so now, at least people have some leverage in being able to exercise their rights. And today, smaller parishes, which they were always vulnerable with mergers, are being upheld in their merger decrees. In St. Louis, 3 parishes, the Vatican reversed Archbishop Rosanek in his mergers, and they are still open. In the Archdiocese of New York, the Dicastery for Clergy revoked Cardinal Dolan's decree merging Immaculate Conception Parish, and that was just about 3 weeks ago. No, maybe 2 months ago. And in Buffalo, like maybe 2 weeks ago, the Dicastery for the Clergy ordered the bishop to keep 14 parishes who were appealing their merger. They ordered them that they must stay open while the merger appeal progressed. And that never happened. They always closed them down, and then 3 years later, they were going to have to open them. So there's substantial progress, and I think is owing a lot to Francis and also Pope Leo as Cardinal Prevost in the Congregation for Bishops, appointing a very good prefect at the Dicastery for the Clergy. The decree from the Archdiocese of New York was as explicit as anything I've ever seen. It was amazing. So, here's the big picture for this part. If it is becoming increasingly difficult for bishops to merge parishes and close churches, I think this makes it more hopeful that they may turn to better options, such as clustering, using pastoral teams, and or appointing parish-like coordinators, rather than breaking up faith communities that I think are the body of Christ and have been insufficiently valued. One of the things Kate found again and again is that our bishop leaders, the parishioners were looking and evaluating their parishes according to a whole other kind of understanding of a faith community and how effective they were with evangelizing and spirituality and the like, whereas the bishops in the diocese were looking at as corporations. How are they doing financially? How are the capital improvements happening? So I think of it, they were looking at them like a bunch of Starbucks franchises. and it's sad but true. Anyway, so we're hoping that if enough people, if the Vatican continues on this trajectory, it could change how things progress. Okay, we'll take a breath. Thank you for listening. Now I'd like to talk about Francis' legacy, because I think it will seed a future full of hope, and he left us in very, very good space in terms of where we are now. His appointments from the Global South suggest movement away from traditional centers of power in the US and Europe. There's been a reorientation of church perspectives toward poorer nations and poorer peoples, rather than intramural doctrinal litmus tests, which we have all lived through and had stopped happening under Francis. And it's largely because of the reform of the Curia, which made significant progress. Francis de-emphasized the power of the Dicastery for the Faith. He made pastoral appointments, such as Cardinal Prevost to the Dicastery. It's Young King. He's somebody from Japan, I think, who's now the prefect of the Dicastery of the Clergy, but also appointed Bishop Prevost at the Dicastery for Bishops. Again, appointing bishops with greater pastoral sensibilities. That's Francis' legacy. He also imposed, this is one of the sort of lesser known, I was amazed when I looked at all of the financial regulations he imposed to enhance transparency of Vatican finances, which many of you know were a total mess. The scandals under Pope Benedict, they wouldn't even, the major financial institutions of Europe would not do business with the Vatican. They even shut down all the ATMs in Vatican City one day. Anyway, thanks to Francis. This was not Benedict's area. Let's just say that. Anyway, and Francis had already done a lot of cleanup in Buenos Aires, so they knew what they were doing when they elected him. He brought modern accounting standards, asked competitive bidding procedures, cut salaries for cardinals, put caps on what gifts they could accept, centralized the assets and investments in one office with a unified ethical and green investment policy. This will continue. He also appointed a secretary for the economy to supervise the finances, staffed mostly by lay experts. He authorized, in terms of accountability, sweeping a criminal trial of botched investments in the London real estate office that lost millions of euros. Some financial issues continue. I think the Vatican is in a financial red this year. And I also read some offices, to avoid all of the new transparency requirements, were squirreling away euros in cash and, under the mattresses. I don't know, but anyway, so obviously it still needs a little work. But the fact is, the standards are vastly different from what they were. He also increased appointments of laity and women in church decision-making at the synod and in the curia, and I have will continue because I don't think this is reversible. Sister Simona Brambilla is a prefect of the Dicastery for Religious Life, and there are so many nuns in this room, and we thank God we finally have one of our own, because for centuries, literally, there have been 3 to 5 times as many female religious as there were religious brothers. So this should have happened probably 2 centuries ago, but at least it happened, you know. An Italian Sister Raphael Petrini is now head of the Vatican City State. We've all heard of Sister Valerie Becard, the Undersecretary of the Synod on Synodality. Francis opened the Synod to voting by lay people and women. More about that later. Named 3 women to the Dicastery for bishops. So the female lens will be brought to bear on who will be leading our diocese around the world. He also appointed women to lead half of the seats on the Vatican's Economic Council. So he gets criticized because of the female deacon thing, and I think rightly so. But you have to also praise systemically what he's done to integrate women into the structures of our church governance. Of course, we can't forget about St. Mary of Magdala. He put her on par with male apostles and changed her July 22nd celebration to a feast day. And as apostles to be apostles. Of course, I know many of you know, but in 1996, everybody still thought Mary of Magdala was a prostitute rather than the first witness to the resurrection. So this was a big gig. Okay, clergy sex abuse. He developed new norms for holding bishops accountable, required clergy to report allegations, created Vatican office to discipline abusers, defrocked Cardinal McCarrick, made documents, I thought this was huge, made documents from internal church files available to the lay courts, which most of our dioceses have not, and we've resisted that strongly. Demanded the resignations of Chilean bishops, complicit in sex abuse covered up, and this was after he defended them vigorously and then found out he was wrong. And he had the humility to ask forgiveness of the Chilean victim survivors. This is another little known thing, I think, that came out of his encyclical Laudato Si. He ignited the imaginations of younger Catholics to engage in creating and supporting an economy that works for both our people and the planet. In May 2019, Francis invited young economists, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders from all over the world to brainstorm ways of making the global economy more responsive to the poor and to the planet. It's called the Economy of Francesco, and since its founding, the initiative has challenged and inspired thousands of young economists and entrepreneurs, one of whom is right here in Detroit, Elizabeth Garlow, to create a new economic paradigm that values the earth and Earth's people and not only financial profit. And Elizabeth founded the Francesco Collaborative that has now joined with Catholic Impact Investing. And the Francesco Collaborative is just one of an ever-expanding cohort of organizations working collectively to create a new economic paradigm that serves people rather than sacrificing them to a profit-first mentality. According to the Global Impact Investing Network, and I think this is key, impact investments are made with the intention of generating positive, measurable social and environmental impact as well as a financial return. So these are very reasonable investments. As far as LGBTQ, Francis, who am I to judge? Who will ever forget that statement? He authorized same-sex blessings in a definitive document, Fiducia Supplicans. He allowed trans people to be baptized and to serve as godparents and witness at weddings. I wish we'd pay attention here. Divorce. He opened the way for divorce and civilly remarried Catholics to receive communion, and I go through the internal form, and most priests and pastoral ministers that I know of have been doing this for years, but he made it okay. He also streamlined the annulment procedures. He fostered interfaith dialogue and engagement with all people of goodwill, forged ties with Islam, was the first pope to visit both the Arabian Peninsula and Iraq. Migration, this was a favorite theme of Francis, and God only knows how much we need it today. He denounced global indifference about migrants. He visited Lampedusa as one of his first things, where so many migrants were being killed or dying in their attempts to find, to survive. Syrian refugees, he decried the inhuman conditions of migrants at the U.S.-Mexico border. He said building a wall is not Christian. Death penalty, inadmissible in all cases. Nuclear weapons, mere possession is immoral. And so all of this are advances of what in church teaching that we already had. Okay, now, take a breath after Francis. I hope I'm not making you too crazy with it. But anyway, these are just some of my own things that I think are important both now and for the future. One, for me, signs of hope are the strength of our Catholic educational institutions, seeding the future, and I think of the Ignatian Solidarity Network, Mary and his volunteers. These are all sustaining and growing and providing new leadership in the church. I could talk a long time about nuns because we are in decline as much as the priests, but there's been a new kind of awareness that, okay, maybe what we had was what we needed at the time, maybe what we need now, maybe we have what we need for now. And I can only attest to the younger women who are joining my congregation that give me great hope for the future. And in particular, there's this whole thing about receiving religious life, not R-E-C-E-D, but R-E-S-E-E-D-I-N-G, with a recognition that we're an increasingly global sisterhood and that there's greater cultural diversity, which is a sign of hope. I also think, and again, I'm aware that in this room we stand on the shoulders of giants among our women theologians and biblical scholars. And this is continuing because once again, the biblical and ecclesial interpretation and historicizing is happening through the lens of those historically on the margins. And one is the female theologians. And just to note how much of what that wisdom is being integrated at the Synod and elsewhere, I'm going to give a shout out to my own book, Crispina and Her Sisters, which uncovered for the first time, I could not believe it, but it was, a study of the archaeologic evidence for women in early Christianity and women's exercise of authority based on an exhaustive study of 4th century tombs showing women in preaching, proclaiming, teaching positions on their tombs at a time when women were being told to be silent in the churches. So the literary text tells you one thing, and the archaeology tells you something else. So anyway, that was fun. Okay. I also want to give a shout out, thank you, to Catholic Women Preach. It was an initiative started by Future Church and others, I think about 8 or 10 years ago. And they have now gone through the entire lectionary. You can find it online. And again, it's women, prepared, competent women pastoral ministers, biblical scholars, many of whom are in this room, preaching scripture through the lens of female experience. And I think in some ways that initiative alone may be one of the engines making it safe for female liturgical leadership in the church, because it's not something to be afraid of. It's a new opening on different aspects of the text. The work of discerning deacons, Roman Catholic women priests, the Women's Ordination Conference, all Dignity USA, New Ways Ministry, all of those will continue. Other signs of hope, people of color, womanist and black theologizing, Sean Copeland, Diana Hayes. This is all part of now, but it's also part of the future. And the same can be said for LGBTQ issues, which I sort of just dealt with. Okay, now I want to go to one of my favorite topics, the Synod and Synodality. Because this, frankly, was amazing to me that this even happened, having lived through of what I think of as the burning times of the CDF being thrown off of every church property on the planet. At the Synod on Synodality, if you'll forgive me, suddenly it was okay for Future Church to have all of our information on the Synod website and Women's Ordination Conference too. And anyway, so to quote, and I think this is the other thing that's just shows you how things happen. Many of you may have known Leonardo Boff's book, Church, Charism, and Power. And his whole idea that the role of the leadership is to facilitate the flaring up of the charisms of all of the people of God. So it's sort of like you're orchestrating that. It's not to be up here telling this is what you do, this is what you do. It's to be, let's notice what the gifts are and lift those up. So he had a whole different idea of how authority should function in the church. In his book, Church, Charism, and Power, Liberation Theology and the Institutional Church, attracted a lot of negative attention from Cardinal Ratzinger, who had been his teacher. Anyway, so we don't like that. But the Synod of Synodality, I think, is a direct outcome of Boff's recognition that leadership in the church derives from the charism, the gifts of the Spirit, first of all. Not from some top-down person. So he said, there are powerful and living forces, particularly at the grassroots, that are not sufficiently recognized. The grassroots are asking for a new structure, a new ecclesial division of labor and religious power. For this, a new vision of the church is necessary. So, and that's a quote from his book, there's reason to believe that Boff's ecclesiology influenced Francis' own vision of synodality and church governance. Francis met with the father of liberation theology, Gustavo Gutierrez, who had also been trashed by the CDF, and he also called Leonardo Boff to consult with him on Laudato Si. So there's evidence. So what about the Synod? It was a 3-year process in which conversations of the Spirit in parishes, dioceses all over the world included church reform communities like Future Church, WAC, Dignity, USA, New Ways Ministry, all of our religious communities all gave input. Continental-wide, so we did the grassroots all over, then we did continental conversations, and then we had 2 sessions. So it was interactive, which was far different from previous synods. I had been in Rome for both the Synod on the Eucharist and then Synod on the Word, and it was deadly dull. You got all these bishops sitting around the table, one bishop after another gave this input about whatever, some flurries. Some of it was substantive, but 80% was not. It was dead, nothing happened. You've got 364 members, 96 were not bishops, and they were given the right to vote. There were 54 women, 25 nuns, 29 lay people, 14 lay men, 27 priests, and 2 religious brothers. And what seeded all of their conversations was what had gone before, the input from all over the world. And I have to give a shout out to the Synod office, the Office on the Synod of Bishops. They created an incredible website that made it very easy for people to do their own processes, even if nothing was happening in your diocese, which was sadly too true for too many in the United States. So, the final report was issued in October 2024, and I just want to highlight, this is the first time in history that the Synod of Bishops, usually what happens with these synods, at the Synod on the Word and the Synod on the Eucharist, everybody gives their input, they come up with like 20 or 30 propositions, they go all into some nebulous black hole in some Vatican office. Nobody hears anything about it again until 2 years later when the Pope issues an apostolic exhortation that hardly touches with what the propositions were. And I can just tell you because I watched this. Not Francis. Francis said, no, this final report is the report. This is part of the ordinary magisterium of the church. Now this is huge because now it has official status as church teaching. And I can't even tell you how monumental that is, because it has input for the first time from lay people, women, others. Yeah, right. So, what was in the final report? Well, I'm just going to hit some of the highlights. Transparency and accountability. Because this is really what's going to seed the future, okay? That's why I want to spend some time with it. It revises church law from a synodal perspective to church law, a revision church law from a synodal perspective, to mandate greater transparency and accountability throughout the church. And among this are improving financial best practices, finance councils, involvement of laity in pastoral and financial planning. And again, this is definitive teaching, so this is supposed to happen, annual audits. Decentralization of decision making. More study to determine what matters of doctrinal authority should be reserved to the Pope and what matters can be decided or enacted by Episcopal conferences. This has been placed into one of 10 study groups that are were not dealt with in depth at the October Synod, but we're supposed to have a report in July or in June about this. So one of the things that didn't come up at all in 2024, even though it was named in the synthesis report, was, well, what about celibacy? What about mandatory celibacy? What about optional celibacy? We've got this pre-shortage going on. Well, my own thought is celibacy is a disciplinary situation. It's not doctrinal. We have a long history of married priests in the church. This is something that theoretically could be addressed by the bishop conferences of the world according to the need in their diocese. So stay tuned. We'll see what happens in June 2025 as a result of further unpacking of what this could mean. Further collaboration of continental groupings of Episcopal conferences. In other words, they want more connecting around practices, synodal practices. More consultation from Roman dicasteries with bishops' conferences, more collaboration among members of the College of Cardinals, establishing a cardinal patriarchs. This is sort of all of the internal organization things that are going to allow people to know one another. These were the final report. Greater involvement of lay people in selecting of bishops. Full implementation of all leadership opportunities already allowed in canon law for women that are currently underexplored. One of them is preaching, lay preaching. They also an overhaul of training for future priests. They asked for a significant presence of women in Catholic seminaries. This is a far cry from 15 years ago, well, probably 20 years ago now. Women were ejected from Catholic seminaries. Seminarians were told they could not have a woman as a spiritual director. Women were not allowed to be teachers. So, anyway, sometimes things have to get worse before they can get better. Also making parish and diocesan pastoral councils mandatory. In liturgy, creating a new synodal study group to examine how liturgical celebrations can offer a better expression of synodality. Who knows what that will be? But these are all things that were mandated, really, in the final report. And I say mandated, but that's not language that would be used in the synod and synodality, because it's a process of walking together, of listening to one another, and then coming to mutual discernment about whatever the issue is at hand. They did a whole thing on safeguarding minors, vulnerable adults. They called for a church that does not, see, now these were the sort of the, difficult issues, LGBTQ, women deacons. But they weren't silent on it either, the final report. It called for a church that does not exclude because of their marital status, situation, identity, or sexuality. They noted that women continue to encounter obstacles in obtaining fuller recognition in all the areas of church life. And they specifically stated, quote, the question of female diaconate remains open. Now we should note that there were energies that did not want that on the table at all. But I think there was a significant portion of Synod delegates who said, no, you cannot not do this. You cannot close this out. It must remain open. And so that stayed in. God bless them. So what now? Well, the synodal process will continue. And this is the local groupings of churches are now called to implement in their different contexts the authoritative proposal contained in the document. Noting that time is still needed to arrive at decisions involving the whole church, and that this is particularly true for the topics entrusted to the 10 study groups, and one of them was women deacons. And anyway, the conclusion of the 16th Ordinary General Assembly does not put an end to the synodal process. And so these 10 study groups were designed to address issues needed more study because, quote, this is sort of euphemistic, I thought, but it was well phrased, juridical and pastoral repercussions, okay? So groups were created by the Synod office with joint agreement from each of the dicasteries involving them to call pastors and experts from all continents to take part in them, taking into consideration not only existing studies, but also the most relevant current experience in the people of God. So the interim report was given in October. The final report will be given in June. And here's the 10 issues. Aspects of the relationship between the Eastern Catholic churches and the Latin Church, listening to the cry of the poor, the mission in the digital environment, the revision of the document governing priestly formation in a missionary and synodal perspective. They're revising what should be in seminaries, what should be happening. Some theological and canonical matters regarding specific ministerial terms. And this SR 8 and 9, they're specifically referencing items in the synthesis report that, again, came from all over the world. And one of them was the charism and mission of the laity, recognizing that lay people are being entrusted with tasks and ministries within the church. Theological reflection and canonical provisions, I want to highlight that, must be reconciled with these important developments. And the deal is, we've got to get in canon law what lay ministries, what lay things are. Other theological and canonical issues, and this is Synod Report 9, had to do with women in the life of and mission of the church. And again, women, a need to assure that women can participate in decision-making processes and assume roles of responsibility. Francis wants, just like he integrated more women in all the decision-making structures in the Vatican, he wants that to happen in every diocese and every parish in the country, in the world, okay? So canon law should be adapted accordingly, and that's why these study groups all have canon lawyers in it. Think about it. Pope Leo the 14th is a doctorate in canon law. So we'll see how that plays out. Anyway, theological and pastoral research on women's access to the diaconate should be continued. We said that. Liturgical texts, I love this, have to be more attentive to using inclusion, a range of words, images, and narratives that draw with greater vitality on women's experience. Okay, again, revision of the documents between relationship between bishops, consecrated life, and ecclesial associations. So I'm just going to suggest that maybe this came right out of the Nunquisition. You know, remember when the bishops in the United States went after the nuns in the United States, and that didn't work out well for them, and it didn't work out well for us either. But that's a good thing right there. Some aspects of the person and ministry of the bishop, judicial functioning of the bishops, and this is important. Nature and course of the ad limina, that means that when bishops go to Rome and report, part of the deal now when they go, they have to report on how did we implement what happened and, you know, the recommendations from these final documents. So I just want to say that, because one of the big deals is, as we've lived through too much, there's no accountability among our leadership. And so part of the thing that the Synod wanted to fix was the structures and processes to regularly verify what the bishop's doing, his style of authority, the economic administration of the diocese's assets, the function of participatory bodies, and protection against all kinds of abuses. This was in the Synthesis Report 12. This could have very big ramifications for bishops being held accountable for their ministry, just like everybody is held accountable for their responsibilities. And this is a big one that I underline, aspects of the person and ministry of the bishop, and this was Synthesis Report 12. The question of the relationship between the sacrament of holy orders and jurisdiction needs to be examined in depth. Right now, the only people who have, until Francis, have juridical status in the church are the ordained, pretty much. So, I'm not the first one to suggest that, but it has been suggested that we link jurisdiction or governance in the church to baptism rather than to ordination. This would be huge. I don't have a whole lot of hope, but the fact that they named it from these listening sessions all over the world, it's a pretty big deal. And okay, I don't want to go too far in the weeds because it'll make it crazy, but another theological, again, this comes right out of, I think of it as the burning times under Pope John Paul II and Ratzinger, when they were going after every theologian that they didn't like the way they thought. They're saying we need to do a better job of discerning what's happening with controversial issues in the church. What are the conditions that make possible theological and cultural research? And knowing, starting from the daily experience of God's holy people. And this is one of the big theological aha moments since Vatican II. You start with what your experience is of God. You don't go somewhere and just pull it out of your head, So just to see that, acknowledged. The role of papal representative in a missionary synodal perspective, the reception of the fruits of the council. So, next, we'll see what happens with those 10 things in June, and they may not all come to fruition, and I'm sure there are different timelines. But right now, as of March 15th, God bless Francis as he's entering his last days, he approved the start of a process of accompaniment calling for the worldwide church, the leadership of the worldwide church, to accompany the people of God in their reception of the outcomes of the Synod of Synodality. And so there's a whole other process underway over the next 3 years. Dioceses, bishops' conferences, lay associations, etc. will work to integrate the synodal principles with the guidance of a Vatican-issued document scheduled to be published in May, this May. It hasn't come out yet, but just so you know. So the Synod isn't over. There's more, because not everybody did it, quite honestly. So, further evaluation assemblies of this accompanying process will be happening from 2027 to early 2028, and progress will be discussed at the final ecclesial assembly at the Vatican in October 2028, where church leaders will reflect on the synodal journey. There's a big thing to note here, the word ecclesial assemblies. Usually every 3 years or every 2 years or whatever, we have a synod of bishops. The next thing, there's no synod of bishops now until 2028, when we're having an ecclesial assembly. There's no gathering of worldwide leadership until 2028, when I expect it will once again include bishops as well as lay leaders. So I don't know how long this will last, but it speaks volumes about how Francis was thinking about the future of the church. Again, think of it as an application of the directives and as a process of reception, okay? He also noted that this implementation plan provides a framework for implementing the results of the 10 Vatican-appointed study groups which have been examining key issues, and we already talked about what those are. But you see, they're setting up structures so that they are holding themselves accountable for what they said we should be doing. Now, of course, Pope Francis, he went home to God, and I'm grateful for him. It's harder for us. We would have liked to have him here, but that's never right. God knows what God is about. But anytime a pope dies, everything stops. And so the work of the synod is suspended now. However, and Cardinal Grech, who is the head of the synod office, sent a letter to Pope Leo on May 12th saying, we stand fully available to offer our service in a spirit of collaboration and obedience. Will Pope Leo continue the work of the synod? Yes. He's a profoundly synodal man, a synod undersecretary, Bishop Moran, who is an undersecretary with Sister Natalie. He's an Augustinian, oh, by the way, and a longtime friend of Pope Leo XIV. In a May 15th interview, he described his friend as a profoundly synodal man. And he also said, quote, "We must overcome the pyramidal, clericalist, and power-driven church." Tell me how you really feel. Anyway, and also the other extreme, which I thought was great balance here, of the assembly church, where everything is the same and charisms and vocations are diluted. So you see a great respect for the variety of charisms in the church being named. Okay, now we have Pope Leo XIV. And I don't know how many other people were amazed, but I was amazed. I did think 3 weeks before, I'm looking at all, and see, I'm sort of a political junkie when it comes to the church. So I noticed, my gosh, this Cardinal Prevost, he's been in Peru, and then Francis made him a bishop, and then Francis brought him to the Congregation for Bishops, and then I think Francis would like this guy to take his place. That's what went through my head. And the second thought was, Francis might want up at the conclave, will never go for it because he's an American, But the conclave went for it, and I'm grateful. We'll see. I'm always in a position of trust but verify. So we'll see. So Pope Leo XIV, an American pope, I think he will continue Francis' legacy of the synod. He is a significant global counterweight, something for which I am heartily grateful, to our president and his corruption and callous disregard for the poor. Tell me how you really feel, Chris. I know, I was grateful for that. I was just happy to see an American on the world stage that I could be proud of, And I honestly think this will also be very attractive to young people. He worked closely with the 3 women Francis appointed to the dicastery of bishops. He is reputedly more traditional than Francis on LGBTQ issues, but that was in 2012, and I think he may have moved. Remains to be seen. And, of course, this is me with my political thing. Whether he will permit married priests and women deacons is yet to be determined, but he could be influenced by the Synod of Synodality. And again, I hope that's not the only litmus test, So here we're finally coming to the conclusion here. Here's my crystal ball. If the promise of a synodal culture truly takes place, we could really see an increased dynamism and investment by the people of God who embrace new church structures, leadership, and decision-making processes that are inclusive, transparent, and accountable. This may lead to some of the changes many Catholics like us have long sought around optional celibacy, women's ordination, and full recognition of the holiness of LGBTQ people. My other thought is if the institutional intransigence continues about opening ordination, we will see continued attempts by benighted bishops to close viable parish communities because of the priest shortage. I don't think that's going to go away. We could see Rome continue, but Rome will continue to uphold parishes who exercise their rights to appeal unjust closings or mergers. This could also lead to increasingly lay-led communities, at least in the global north. It can also lead to an increasing negative impact on the vitality of parishes and Catholic sacramental life in our global north. And I hope I'm wrong about that, but I don't think so. So, if no significant changes about increasing women in decision-making in sacramental ministry, LGBTQ outreach, if there are no significant changes, I anticipate a continued, this is the bad news part of my crystal ball, I anticipate a continued decline in women LGBTQ youth connecting with Catholicism. And there was a recent, well, maybe 2 years ago, study of younger women that showed for the first time in history, younger women were less likely to be engaged in their Catholic faith than younger men were. And that was new. We will also see a continued sacramental decline because women are the traditional carriers of faith formation in families. I will accept my nephew is the one who brings all of his kids to church. So he's the exception, but by and large, that's how it is. That said, despite the chaotic reality of people not going to church or finding meaning, nourishment elsewhere, the reality is the Holy Spirit does her best work in chaos, you know? You know, the Spirit hovered over the waters. Everything was a mess, and then the Spirit did her thing. So that's where my trust is. So meanwhile, life in parishes, small faith communities, Catholic educational institutions is the fertile ground from which our future as the people of God will emerge. And just a quick reminder, Jesus started with a very small band of women and men who, in the course of 3 centuries, actually changed the face of the Roman Empire. So we have to remember, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Amen.